In the illuminated kitchen of the mansion in the upscale neighborhood, an unexpected scene shattered the calm. The girl, with tears in her eyes, washed dishes without having eaten a bite, while the woman in red reprimanded her harshly. Sitting at the table, the stepmother's son kept silent, and from the doorway, the millionaire father appeared suddenly, watching in disbelief as his daughter was treated like a servant. What he was about to discover would not only test his trust, but also the true value of the word home. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. And before we continue, let me wish you health and peace. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you listening to this story? In the elegant upscale neighborhood, everything seemed perfect, but in the eyes of a young girl hid a fear that no one saw. After his wife's death, Mr. Ricardo Valverde had sought to rebuild his life. As a businessman accustomed to making quick and effective decisions, he believed the best thing for his daughter Marina was to offer her the figure of a mother. That's how Isabel Montoro appeared in his life, a woman of elegant bearing, impeccable smile, and gentle manners in public. In everyone's eyes, they were the ideal couple. He, a successful businessman with offices in the heart of downtown. She, a refined lady who knew how to move through cocktail parties and gala dinners. That spring evening, on the eve of Memorial Day, the dining room table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, and a bottle of red wine rested among the plates. Marina, barely 8 years old, nervously played with her fork while listening to her father. Her dark curls fell over her forehead, and her eyes moved restlessly, as if afraid to say too much. Ricardo spoke enthusiastically about an upcoming business trip to San Francisco. He explained that he had to oversee a project in the harbor district, something that would keep him busy for at least a week. Marina tried to smile, but inside she shrank at the idea of being left alone with Isabel. At her young age, she had learned to read the silent language of adults. Tense gestures, forced smiles, looks that said more than words. Isabel, dressed in an elegant ivory-colored dress, nodded with a serene expression. Her hands caressed the edge of her glass as if it were an innocent gesture, but her eyes conveyed something else, a calculating, cold gleam that only ignited when Ricardo wasn't looking at her. In front of her, her son Alvaro showed off a racing car that his mother had bought him that same morning downtown. The boy laughed, full of confidence, while Marina lowered her head in silence. Dinner continued with trivial comments. Ricardo praised the quality of the steak he had tried at a steakhouse days before, and Isabel feigned interest. In the background, distant laughter and music could be heard coming from the city, where Memorial Day celebrations were already being prepared. However, inside the house reigned an artificial calm, as if the walls themselves contained a secret. When the dining room clock struck 10 p.m., Ricardo set his fork on the plate and announced in a firm voice that he would leave the next day. He explained that his assistants had already organized everything, that the car would take him early to the station to catch the train. Isabel smiled with satisfaction, offering sweet words. "Dear, don't worry, everything will be under control here." Marina, on the other hand, felt a knot tighten in her chest. The bread on her plate became impossible to swallow, and she looked at her father with a silent plea. Her small hands played with the tablecloth as if seeking refuge she couldn't find. No one noticed how the girl swallowed silent tears, except perhaps Alvaro, who at that moment simply continued chewing without saying a word. Ricardo, satisfied that he had left everything in order, raised his wineglass to toast. Isabel imitated him with an impeccable gesture. Marina raised her glass of milk, trying to keep her fingers from trembling. Outside, a car passed slowly down the cobblestone street, its lights entering through the half-open blinds. The air smelled of jasmine, typical of spring evenings. "Dad, when will you come back?" Marina whispered, but her voice was lost among the wine glasses and the silence of the table. When the door closed behind Ricardo, the air in the house changed abruptly. There was no longer any trace of Isabel's sweet tone or her calculated smiles. The woman dropped onto the living room sofa, turned on the television, and asked Marina to clear the table without even looking at her. The girl obeyed in silence, gathering plates and silverware while the laughter of a game show echoed from the screen. Marina tried to do it carefully, but her arms were too small for the pile of plates she had to carry. She walked with uncertain steps toward the kitchen, and on that path, Alvaro passed by her side with a toy car in hand, offering no help. Isabel barely raised her voice with a phrase that stuck like a knife. "If you want dinner tonight, first wash those glasses well." The girl swallowed hard and nodded. Though her stomach rumbled with hunger, the kitchen was illuminated with a white light that made the steel sink shine. Marina placed the plates one after another, opened the faucet, and let the water run. The dish soap foam rose like tiny mountains, and her hands sank into them while her fingers went numb. Each time one of the glasses slipped, her heart raced, fearing Isabel would hear it break. In the living room, Isabel leafed through a fashion magazine while Alvaro settled in with a plate of cookies. The contrast was stark. He eating peacefully, and Marina barely able to stand. Isabel occasionally threw out a dry order. "Faster, Marina. You still have to sweep the floor." The girl barely responded, focused on not dropping the plates. The minutes felt eternal. The hot water reddened her skin, and a tear fell onto the foam without her being able to prevent it. At that age, any girl should be playing outside or studying with her colored notebooks. But Marina was trapped between dirty dishes and the demands of a woman who had never loved her. Alvaro watched the scene from the corner of his eye. He said nothing, but for the first time he seemed uncomfortable. He saw how Marina scrubbed a glass with such effort that her knuckles turned white. For an instant, he thought about offering her a cookie, but his mother's glance silenced him. He too was a prisoner, though in a different way, a prisoner of blind obedience to Isabel. When she finally finished with the dishes, Marina thought she could sit down for a moment. However, Isabel appeared in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. "Not yet. Sweep the floor and arrange the chairs. Then we'll see if you've earned something to eat." The girl nodded again without protest. Her silence was her only defense. From the kitchen window, she could see the street illuminated by street lamps. Some families passed by returning from the fair, carrying colorful balloons and bags of donuts. Marina glanced at them while sweeping, wishing she could be there with her father, trying funnel cakes at the carnival. The contrast hurt as much as the exhaustion in her arms. Time passed and the house was in order, as if an adult employee had worked there for hours. Isabel, satisfied, turned off the television and led her son to bed. Marina, on the other hand, received a piece of stale bread and a glass of water as dinner. She accepted it without complaint, eyes fixed on the floor. While slowly chewing that bread, she remembered her father's words. "I trust Isabel. She'll take care of you." Her heart burned, thinking he would never know the truth. Outside, the laughter of young people celebrating Memorial Day Eve rose through the streets. But for Marina, the night was only a pit of silence. In the dim kitchen, with the sink still damp and the smell of soap in the air, the girl closed her eyes for a moment. A tear slid down her cheek, mixing with the salty taste of bread, and the murmur of the city remained as distant as the embrace of her absent mother. From the window, the neighbor Rosa watched the scene with a worried expression. She had already seen that girl work to exhaustion too many times, and in her heart, she wondered how long it would take the father to open his eyes. Days passed and Marina's laughter faded like a candle on a windless night. Every morning she woke up before the house alarm went off, her body tired and her hands still rough from the soap. While other children her age ran to school with colorful backpacks, she remained trapped among household chores that Isabel imposed with cold authority. The dining room, which had once been the scene of family conversations, transformed into hostile territory. Isabel served breakfast to Alvaro generously: warm milk, toast spread with butter and jam, and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. Marina, on the other hand, received a slice of almost stale bread and sometimes only a glass of water. The girl lowered her gaze without daring to ask for more. The injustice was so evident that even Alvaro, with his mouth full, glanced at her sideways and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. One gray day, with clouds announcing rain, Isabel decided the girls should clean the kitchen floor. While Alvaro snacked on donuts with hot chocolate that his mother had bought from the corner bakery, Marina scrubbed on her knees. The contrast was cruel. The sweet smell of chocolate floated in the air, but she only felt the cold of the tiles against her skin. At that moment, Mrs. Carmen appeared, the family's former housekeeper, who had come to return some old keys. Her slow walk and warm voice broke the kitchen silence. "Marina, sweetheart, what are you doing on the floor?" she asked with bewilderment. The girl looked up with tear-stained cheeks and the damp cloth in her hands. Isabel hurried to intervene. "I'm just teaching her discipline, Carmen. There's nothing to worry about." Her tone sounded cordial, but her eyes sent a warning. Mrs. Carmen frowned. She had spent years in that house, had seen Marina grow from a baby, and knew the difference between discipline and humiliation. Before she could respond, Isabel dismissed her with a cutting gesture. "Thank you for your visit, but we're busy." Marina watched as the older woman retreated slowly, never stopping looking at her with concern. That instant gave her back a small ray of hope. Someone had seen the truth. Someone knew she wasn't lying. The afternoon fell over the city with a dark sky. From the window could be heard the drums and guitars of a group of young people rehearsing for Memorial Day festivities. The city's joy seemed a world apart, separated by the walls of that house that had become a prison for a young girl. In the living room, Isabel leafed through a fashion magazine, indifferent. Alvaro played with his toy car, but his gaze stopped every moment on Marina. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck. He had learned to obey his mother without questioning her, and breaking that pattern was harder than he thought. Marina, in silence, continued fulfilling orders, cleaning windows, arranging chairs, picking up crumbs from the floor. Each task made her more invisible, as if she were gradually erasing herself from the adult world around her. The only thing keeping her interior alive was the memory of walks with her father through downtown, having ice cream in summer and listening to stories about old statues. That night, when Isabel finally locked herself in her bedroom, Marina stood for a moment by the window. From there, she saw the figure of Mrs. Carmen talking with the neighbor Rosa, both looking toward the house with serious expressions. The two women exchanged low words, and Marina understood she wasn't completely alone. In San Francisco, meanwhile, Ricardo Valverde was finishing a meeting with architects at a hotel near the harbor. Suddenly, a sensation pierced him like a premonition. The image of his daughter appeared in his mind, with the sad eyes he had seen at the last dinner. The businessman, accustomed to numbers and contracts, felt a stab in his chest he couldn't explain. He stood up from the meeting table and made an unexpected decision. He would cut the trip short and return home earlier than planned. He needed to see Marina. He needed to make sure she was okay. He didn't know that at that moment his daughter was crying silently, with hands cracked from detergent, and her heart clinging to the hope of not being forgotten. The city filled with music and flowers for Memorial Day, but in the Valverde house reigned a cutting silence. From the windows came the distant echo of street musicians and the laughter of popular celebrations, while inside the tension could be cut with a knife. Marina, standing by the sink, could barely reach the plates with her thin arms. Isabel, sitting on a high chair, watched her with a stern expression. "Faster, Marina, we don't have all night," she ordered in a voice charged with impatience. The girl, exhausted, could barely maintain her balance with a pile of slippery plates in her hands. The water ran constantly, and the soap burned in the cracks of her skin. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she knew any complaint would bring an even greater punishment. Dinner of only stale bread or even nothing. Alvaro sat at the table with a bowl of fresh fruit his mother had placed in front of him. He peeled a tangerine and looked at his stepsister with troubled eyes. He wasn't directly guilty of that injustice, but silence made him an accomplice. Each segment he ate tasted bitter, though he didn't dare say so. Outside, the fireworks of the celebration exploded in colors over the city sky. The glow filtered through the curtains, tinting the dining room with red and green flashes. Isabel, irritated by the street noises, slammed the window shut and turned her anger toward the girl. "If you want dinner, first finish all this. Not a single glass should be left dirty." Marina felt tears cloud her vision. Exhaustion was defeating her, and her small hands trembled so much that one of the glasses almost slipped. She held her breath and carefully placed it on the counter. No one applauded her effort. She only heard Isabel's harsh voice. "The floor is still left." At that instant, the sound of a key turning in the front door lock echoed throughout the house. Isabel paled for a second, as if not expecting anyone. Marina, her heart beating at 1,000, looked up. The silence became denser than ever. Mr. Ricardo Valverde entered with firm steps, still carrying the leather briefcase he used for his meetings. He had taken the train back from San Francisco without warning, driven by that stab of worry that had accompanied him since the last dinner. Upon setting foot in the living room, the image that opened before him froze his blood. Isabel shouting, Marina with red hands at the sink, and Alvaro sitting at the table as a silent spectator. Ricardo dropped the briefcase on the floor, unable to move his gaze. Isabel tried to smile, but her gesture broke under the intensity of her husband's stare. Ricardo, I didn't expect you back so soon, she began to say in an uncertain tone, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Marina, on the exhaustion engraved on her childish face, on the hands reddened by detergent. His heart hurt as if someone had squeezed it hard. Enough, Isabel, he finally roared in a voice so powerful that the echo resonated throughout the house. Silence fell abruptly. Isabel stood petrified, and Alvaro dropped a tangerine segment to the floor. Marina, surprised, dropped the cloth she was holding and looked at him with bright eyes, full of fear and hope. At the same time, the air in the room changed. For the first time in a long while, the girl felt that justice could be on her side. Outside, a group of locals sang festive songs for Memorial Day, oblivious to the silent battle being waged in that house. Inside, tension accumulated like a storm about to break. Ricardo took another step toward his daughter. The scene was about to change everything. The sound of plates falling into the sink was the only echo in that silence of fear. Ricardo had arrived unexpectedly, and what he saw filled him with an unbearable mixture of rage and pain. Marina, trembling, kept her gaze down with hands red from hot water and detergent. Isabel, for her part, tried to regain composure, adjusting her dress while searching for words to soften the scene. Ricardo, it's not what it seems, she murmured with a forced smile. I was just teaching her discipline. Children must learn responsibilities. The businessman fixed his eyes on her, incredulous. Discipline? An 8-year-old girl? You make her wash dishes until her hands crack. You leave her without dinner? His voice, normally firm and measured in business meetings, now trembled with contained emotion. Isabel tried to approach, but he raised his hand, stopping her. Don't say another word, he thundered. The echo of his voice resonated in the house walls, louder than the fireworks exploding in the city sky. Ricardo bent down to Marina and took her hands gently. The contrast tore him apart. The small palms reddened, the cracked fingers. His eyes filled with tears, something he hadn't allowed even in the hardest moments of his business life. My daughter, he whispered, unable to say more. Marina then looked at him with moist eyes, and from her trembling lips came a phrase that broke everyone's heart present. Dad, you won't leave me alone anymore, will you? Time seemed to stop. Alvaro, who until then had remained silent, lowered his head with shame. Isabel, on the other hand, took a step forward desperately. Ricardo, you can't let yourself be manipulated by a child. I've done what's best for everyone. But Ricardo wasn't listening anymore. In that instant, he understood that his biggest mistake hadn't been marrying Isabel, but having relegated his daughter to silence and loneliness. He had entrusted Marina to the care of someone incapable of giving her love, and that absence was a guilt he now had to repair. My daughter is taught with love, not with humiliation, he shouted, and each word was a hammer blow in the air. Isabel stepped back, the mask finally broken. Her face showed fear and rage, but she no longer had power over the situation. Alvaro, in a timid voice, dared to speak for the first time. Mom, Marina isn't lying. I've seen everything. The boy shrank, but his words remained floating like a condemnation. Isabel looked at him horrified, unable to believe her own son had turned against her. Ricardo took a deep breath, like someone making an irreversible decision. This house is no longer yours, Isabel. You've lost the right to call yourself a mother in front of my daughter. He pointed to the door with an unappealable gesture of authority. The silence that followed was unbearable. Isabel pressed her lips, her eyes full of fury and humiliation. She took her son by the arm, trying to drag him, but Alvaro resisted with tears in his eyes. I don't want to go with you now, Mom, he stammered. The rejection of her own son was the final blow. Isabel, defeated, left the room with faltering steps. The door slammed shut, leaving behind an echo that seemed to announce the end of an era. Ricardo knelt in front of Marina, hugged her tightly, and lifted her in his arms. He had never felt such determination. He would never again allow anyone to hurt her. The girl hid her face in his chest, and for the first time in a long while she felt safe. The fireworks exploded outside, illuminating the windows with colored lights, but the true radiance was inside, that of a father who, through tears, had decided to change his life. The house, once a scene of shouting, filled with a different silence, that of calm after the storm. Isabel was no longer there. The door slammed shut had marked the end of her presence in the Valverde family. In the living room, the echoes of the argument gradually faded, and in their place remained Ricardo's labored breathing, still with tears in his eyes, and Marina's slight trembling as she clung to his chest. Ricardo held her for a long while, as if wanting to recover all the hugs he hadn't given her in recent years. His shirt became damp with the girl's tears, but he made no attempt to pull her away. "Never again, Marina," he whispered in a broken voice. "Never again will you be alone." And in that phrase, there was no empty promise, but the conviction of a man who had understood his mistake and was willing to make amends. Later, in the illuminated kitchen, Ricardo turned on the stove and looked for eggs, potatoes, and onions. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, seemed clumsy peeling the potatoes. Marina watched him from the table with still reddened eyes, but little by little a timid smile formed on her lips. She couldn't believe that her father, the man who always delegated everything to assistants, was preparing a Spanish omelet just for her. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Ricardo opened and found Mrs. Carmen, who had returned after hearing rumors of the argument. She carried in her hands a box of typical Memorial Day pastries wrapped in white paper. "I thought you might need these tonight," she said tenderly. Upon entering, she hugged Marina as if she were her own granddaughter. The girl clung to her with gratitude, and the atmosphere of the house changed abruptly. It was no longer a place of fear, but of welcome. Alvaro appeared behind with downcast eyes. He slowly approached Marina and murmured, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have kept quiet." "You were right." Marina looked at him surprised. For days she had felt he was part of the problem, but now she saw in his face the genuine remorse of a child trapped between obedience to his mother and compassion. She didn't respond with words, but nodded gently, accepting the gesture. Ricardo placed the omelet on the table and served portions on simple plates. Mrs. Carmen put the pastries in the center, and Marina received one with shining eyes, as if it were the greatest of gifts. The girl bit a piece, and between the sweet taste of anise and the warmth of the kitchen, she felt something she had forgotten, the security of a home. While they ate, the fireworks of the festival could be heard in the city sky. The dining room windows lit up with red, green, and golden flashes. Ricardo carried Marina in his arms to the window so she could better see the fireworks. She rested her head on his shoulder and let out a light, clear laugh, like little bells announcing the rebirth of her childhood. Mrs. Carmen, from the table, murmured, "That's how it should be. Mr. Ricardo, true wealth is here, in what is built with love." He nodded silently, moved. There was no business deal or building erected by his company that could equal the value of that moment. On the street, neighbors celebrated with guitars and tambourines, sharing wine and traditional songs. The aroma of pastries and carnation flowers floated in the air. Inside the Valverde house, however, the celebration was intimate and profound. A father and daughter finding each other again, a family beginning to heal. Ricardo gently squeezed Marina's shoulders and lifted her so she could see the last flashes in the night sky. No more words were needed. She understood that that embrace was the promise of a different future. The voice of the narrator closed the story. The true wealth of Mr. Ricardo was not in his businesses or in the upscale neighborhood, but in his daughter Marina's smile. On Memorial Day nights, when fireworks illuminate the city skies, many remember the joy shared in the plazas, the sweet pastries, and the music that unites generations. In the Valverde house, however, the true celebration wasn't the fireworks, but the silent reconciliation between a father and his daughter. The scene with Marina laughing again under Ricardo's protection invites us to stop and think. And you? If this story has moved you, write a 1 in the comments. If you think it could have been different, or wish to leave a suggestion, press 0. The essential thing, dear listeners, is that sincere love always conquers indifference. Ricardo learned that discipline without tenderness is only cruelty, and that no fortune can fill the void of an abandoned child's heart. The lesson is clear. We all need a home where we are accepted without conditions, because kindness, even in the smallest gestures, can change entire destinies. Just like a lamp lit by a window guides travelers in the darkness, an act of tenderness is enough to illuminate the darkest paths of our lives. And true wealth is not measured in bank accounts, but in the capacity to love, to forgive, and to give second chances. Today, while the streets vibrate with songs and guitars, I invite you to reflect on who we could extend a hand to so they don't feel invisible. Perhaps the answer is closer than we think, at the table in our own home. If this story touched your heart, share it. And if you wish to continue listening to stories that celebrate the strength of family, I encourage you to subscribe, because in the end, the only thing that remains is that warmth that is born when we stop living only for ourselves and begin to live for those we love.